Hey, Grandpa, are you going to take all day with that panel? This isn't a museum. The voice, sharp and laced with the kind of condescending impatience that only youth and unearned authority can produce, sliced through the ambient hum of the cavernous hangar. It was aimed at the back of an old man, folded onto a low stool, his focus entirely consumed by the inner workings of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. The formidable aircraft, affectionately known as the Warthog, sat like a resting beast, its skin scarred with the marks of service, its belly open for surgery. The old man didn't flinch. His hands, gnarled with age and mapped with the fine, dark lines of 1,000 repairs, continued their delicate work. He was manipulating a hydraulic line near the main landing gear, his movements slow, yes, but imbued with a certainty that was almost hypnotic. He was Samuel Corbin, though to the Air Force Contracting Office, he was just S. Corbin, an 85-year-old civilian specialist who came in twice a month to consult on the fleet of aging Warthogs. "Did you hear me, old-timer?" Lieutenant Peterson strode closer, his polished boots clicking in arrogant rhythm on the stained concrete. He was young, maybe 28, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched and eyes that were always scanning for infractions. He was a new maintenance supervisor, and he ran his section by the book, a book he seemed to think he had written himself. Samuel finished tightening a fitting before he finally turned his head. His eyes, a pale but startlingly clear blue, settled on the lieutenant. They held no anger, no fear, just a deep, unshakable calm. "I heard you, Lieutenant." His voice was gravelly, quiet. "Then what's the holdup?" Peterson gestured impatiently at the open panel. "My airmen could have had this entire section serviced and closed up an hour ago. We have a sortie schedule to keep. This bird needs to be flight-ready by 1600. Samuel slowly looked from the lieutenant's face back to the hydraulic line. "This particular fitting," he said, his voice measured, "has a tendency to shear if it's torqued too quickly or with uneven pressure. Rushing it now means a catastrophic failure later. Probably during a hard bank." He spoke of it not as a possibility, but as a simple, mechanical truth. Peterson scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Problems? The only problem I see is a civilian contractor who thinks he's getting paid by the hour to tell war stories to my airmen." He glanced around, ensuring his audience of young mechanics could see him dressing down the old man. A few of them looked away, suddenly finding a tool cart intensely interesting. One of them, a young airman first class named Chun, watched with a knot tightening in his stomach. He'd spoken to the old man before. He knew there was something different about him. "I need you to step away from the aircraft, sir," Peterson said, his tone shifting from merely arrogant to officially commanding. "I'm pulling you off this job. We'll have a certified active duty tech finish it." Samuel didn't move. He simply looked at the lieutenant with those steady eyes. "Son," he said, the words soft but carrying an unexpected weight, "your tech will do it the way the manual says. The manual is wrong about this part." I should know. That was the final straw for Peterson. The insubordination, the quiet defiance, the use of the word son. It all coalesced into a hot flare of anger in his chest. "That's it. You're done." He reached down and grabbed Samuel's arm to haul him to his feet. "I'm personally escorting you to the gate. We'll be terminating your contract." It was not a gentle grip. Peterson's fingers dug into the thin, worn fabric of Samuel's work shirt and the fragile-looking flesh beneath. As he pulled, the loose sleeve slid up the old man's forearm. And that's when the world seemed to stop. Exposed on the pale, wrinkled skin was a scar. It wasn't a simple line from a youthful mistake or a surgical incision. This was a brutal, puckered mark, a starburst of jagged, silvery tissue that looked like a fork of lightning had been seared into his arm. It was old, decades old, but its violent origins were unmistakable. For Lieutenant Peterson, it was just a strange-looking scar. But for Samuel, the pressure of the lieutenant's grip, the sudden exposure of that mark to the cool hangar air, was a key turning a lock in the deepest vault of his memory. The smell of burnt concrete and jet fuel was suddenly thick in his nostrils. The high-pitched whine of the Warthog's twin engines was deafening, not the placid hum of the hangar, but the desperate scream of an engine under full throttle. He wasn't in a clean, well-lit hangar in Arizona. He was on his knees in the black, shifting sands of the Saudi desert. The year was 1991, and the only light came from the green-tinged glow of emergency chem lights and the terrifying, intermittent bloom of enemy mortar fire on the horizon. His plane, tail number 78-0582, nicknamed Whispering Death by its pilot, had limped back to their forward operating base, a glorified strip of asphalt in the middle of nowhere. It was riddled with holes from anti-aircraft fire. The pilot, a young captain named Jackson with fear in his eyes, was being pulled from the cockpit. A hydraulic line in the starboard wheel well had been shredded. Without it, the landing gear would never retract. The plane was a sitting duck, useless for the critical mission it was scheduled to fly in less than an hour, providing close air support for a company of Army Rangers pinned down less than 30 clicks away. "Leave it, Sam," Jackson had yelled over the roar. "The whole thing's a write-off. We got to get to the bunker." But Samuel Corbin, then a 40-something Master Sergeant, shook his head. He was the crew chief. This was his bird, his responsibility. He'd crawled under the fuselage, his tools moving with frantic precision. He found the ruptured line, blood-red fluid pulsing weakly into the sand. He could bypass it, but it required splicing two connectors that were never meant to meet. A whistling sound cut through the air, growing louder, higher. Someone screamed, "Incoming!" The world erupted in a flash of white-hot light and a deafening crack. Shrapnel, superheated and razor-sharp, tore through the air. One piece, no bigger than his thumb, sliced through the thin metal of the wheel well and into his forearm. The pain was immense, a searing, electric shock. He cried out, clamping his other hand over the wound. Blood, his own this time, poured through his fingers, dark and hot. But through the ringing in his ears, he could hear the static-laced pleas from the command tent's radio. The Rangers were taking heavy fire. They were being overrun. He looked at his bleeding arm, then at the severed hydraulic line. He gritted his teeth, wrapped a greasy rag around the gash, and went back to work. With blood slicking his tools and his vision starting to tunnel, he forced the connectors together. He twisted the final fitting just as his strength gave out, whispering, "There. Fly, you pig." He passed out on the sand, the smell of his own blood mixing with the hydraulic fluid. "Lieutenant, unhand that man. Now." The voice was a thunderclap that shattered Samuel's memory and echoed through the hangar. It wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute, unquestionable authority that made every airman freeze and every conversation die. Lieutenant Peterson snapped his hand back from Samuel's arm as if it were a hot stove. He spun around and snapped to a rigid salute. "Sir." Striding toward them was Colonel Davis, the base commander. He was a tall man in his late 50s, his flight suit immaculate, his face a granite mask of cold fury. He didn't look at Peterson. He didn't look at anything but the old man slowly, deliberately, pulling his sleeve back down over his forearm. The colonel came to a stop a few feet away. The anger on his face slowly melted away, replaced by something else. Disbelief. Awe. And then a profound, soul-deep respect that radiated from him. His eyes were locked on the spot where the scar had been. I don't believe it," Colonel Davis said, his voice now a near whisper. He took a hesitant step closer, as one might approach a holy site. "That scar, the starburst pattern. They call it the forked lightning. Are you Saint Sam?" Samuel Corbin finally looked up from his work, his gaze meeting the colonel's. A faint, sad smile touched the corners of his mouth. "It's just Sam now, Colonel," he said softly. "Been a long time." Colonel Davis stood frozen for a moment, the entire history of the United States Air Force seeming to pass through his eyes. Then, he slowly, deliberately, drew himself to attention. It wasn't the crisp, automatic snap of a subordinate. It was the formal, dignified posture of a junior officer showing respect to a senior, a warrior acknowledging a legend. Then he turned to Lieutenant Peterson. The cold fury was back, magnified tenfold. "Lieutenant," he began, his voice dangerously low. "Do you have any idea who you just assaulted?" Peterson was chalk white, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Sir, he was refusing to follow a direct order. He was impeding the maintenance schedule on an active sortie aircraft. I was within my rights to." "Your rights?" The colonel cut him off, his voice rising with controlled rage. He gestured to the silent audience of airmen who were now watching, wide-eyed. "Let me educate you, Lieutenant. Let me educate all of you. He pointed a finger, not at Samuel, but at the A-10 Warthog. You see this aircraft? You see this tough, ugly, beautiful machine? This man, he now turned and gestured reverently towards Samuel, didn't just learn to work on them. He helped write the book on how to keep them alive. He was a Master Sergeant, a crew chief for the 103rd Special Operations Squadron during Desert Storm. A unit so secret, on paper, it didn't even exist. A murmur went through the young airmen. They traded confused, odd glances. He wasn't in some cushy, air-conditioned hangar in Riyadh. The colonel continued, his voice ringing with passion. He was at Forward Operating Base Viper, a patch of sand and asphalt so close to the front lines they used to say the mechanics needed flight pay. He and his team performed miracles. They took battle-damaged planes that should have been scrapped and had them back in the air in hours, not days. They invented repairs on the fly that engineers back at Wright-Patterson said were impossible. The colonel took a step closer to Peterson, his eyes boring into the young officer. That scar on his arm that you so carelessly exposed? He got that from a piece of enemy mortar shrapnel. It sliced his arm open while he was under the fuselage of this very type of aircraft, patching a severed hydraulic line during an attack. He refused to leave the plane. He finished the repair, passed out from blood loss, and saved that Warthog. An aircraft that, less than an hour later, took off and destroyed a column of 3 T-72 tanks that were about to annihilate an entire company of U.S. Army Rangers. The hangar was utterly silent now, the only sound the faint hum of the ventilation system. Peterson looked as if he'd been physically struck. His eyes darted from the furious colonel to the quiet old man who was now just watching, his expression unreadable. For that action, the colonel's voice dropped, becoming thick with emotion. He was awarded the Air Force Cross, our nation's second highest award for valor. It was presented in a classified ceremony. He was offered a battlefield commission, right then and there. He turned it down. He was offered any post he wanted, stateside. He turned it down. He said his place was with the planes and with the kids flying them. He has forgotten more about this airframe than you and all your certified techs will ever know, Lieutenant. He wrote half the emergency protocols and the manuals you hold so sacred. The colonel let the words hang in the air, heavy and damning. This man is not a contractor. He is a living treasure. He is a giant of the Air Force. And you, he jabbed a finger at Peterson's chest, put your entitled, ignorant hands on him because you were impatient. The weight of it all finally crashed down on Lieutenant Peterson. Humiliation, hot and absolute, flooded his face. He looked at Samuel, at this quiet, unassuming old man, and saw him for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as a monument. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, broken. My office. 0800 tomorrow. The colonel commanded, his voice flat and final. We are going to have a very long, very unpleasant conversation about history, about humility, and about the future, or lack thereof, of your career in my Air Force. Dismissed. Peterson, his face ashen, managed a shaky salute, turned on his heel, and walked away, the sound of his own footsteps seeming to mock him in the vast, silent space. The colonel watched him go before turning back to Samuel, his entire demeanor softening. The commander was gone, replaced by a humble airman. Sam, Mr. Corbin, on behalf of my command, and from the bottom of my heart, I am so sorry. Samuel simply gave a small, tired nod. His gaze was on the A-10. She's a good bird, he murmured, almost to himself. Always was. Just needs a gentle hand. He pointed with a grease-stained finger at the very fitting he'd been working on. Told them back in '92 that this alloy was too brittle. They went with it anyway. Cheaper. The gathered airmen began to slowly disperse, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. They looked at Samuel with new eyes, with the kind of awe usually reserved for the aircraft themselves. He was no longer just the old contract guy. He was a part of the Warthog's soul. An hour later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a figure approached Samuel. It was Lieutenant Peterson. He stood a few feet away, his posture no longer arrogant, but slumped in shame. He held his cover in his hands, twisting it nervously. Mr. Corbin, sir, he began, his voice shaky and small. He couldn't meet the old man's eyes. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant. I was disrespectful. And I was wrong. I am. I am profoundly sorry. Samuel slowly straightened up from his stool, his back cracking softly. He wiped his hands on a clean rag, his movements deliberate. He studied the young officer for a long moment, his clear blue eyes searching the lieutenant's face. He saw not the arrogant officer from before, but a scared, humbled young man on the verge of losing everything he'd worked for. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice was devoid of triumph or anger. It was just quiet and deeply resonant. The uniform doesn't make the man, son. Your actions do. The rank gives you authority, but your character is what earns you respect. You forgot that today. Peterson flinched but nodded, accepting the truth of the words. Yes, sir. Samuel looked at the young man, then gestured with his head back toward the open panel on the A-10. My apology is keeping that plane on the ground. Let's get her ready. He then held out a specialized torque wrench. Now, if you really want to learn something, grab this. Let me show you why this specific fitting needs to feel the pressure, not just take it. There's a difference. Stunned, Peterson looked from the offered wrench to the old man's face. He saw no trap, no trick. He saw only an invitation, a chance. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took the heavy tool. Okay, he whispered. Okay, sir. And as the last light of day faded, a strange and beautiful scene unfolded in the quiet of the hangar. A living legend, a hero forged in secret fire, patiently taught a humbled young officer the right way to care for a machine he loved. It wasn't about punishment. It was about passing on a legacy. It was about grace. It's in these quiet moments that the truest lessons are learned. Heroes are all around us, hidden not in history books, but in the quiet dignity of a garage, a workshop, or a hangar. They don't wear their greatness like a medal. They carry it in the scars on their arms, the wisdom in their eyes, and the forgiveness they offer to those who have yet to understand. They remind us that true strength isn't about the authority you wield, but the respect you earn and the grace you show. So the next time you encounter someone who seems a little older, a little slower, take a moment. Look closer. You never know when you might be standing in the presence of a giant.